Canada's having a birthday. Canada is 150 years old this year. And I've seen Canada in a way that very, very few Canadians have, both on the ground, as a pilot in the Air Force, training out of Moose Jaw, but then as an astronaut on board spaceships. I've crossed Canada thousands of times in just a matter of 8 or 9 minutes. And that perspective, coupled with having lived outside the country for 25 years and then moving back, I think it gives me a perspective that's just unusual and maybe a little provocative in how I see the country, both historically and what's going on now and what's going on in the future. So there's all that to talk about and celebrate the birthday. I'm going to show some pictures, of course, not only pictures from space, but try and look around at the country and see what's going on. I'll have a chance to interact with the audience, a question and answer, and play a little music, of course. And I've spoken in many cities across the country already. The show's been really well received, and I'm very much looking forward to being there tomorrow night. The size and breadth of Canada itself, second biggest country in the world, an immense amount of the planet. When you fly on board a spaceship, it seems like you're always over Canada, just because we come up an arc across the country. So you really get to see it that way, just from a geology and geography point of view. But of course, it's the people that make the biggest difference. And the way we came to be the country that we are, the last, 18,000 years of people that have come to Canada, including the ones that are just arriving today. It's a really long, interesting history. And the way we formed a country, it's imperfect. And we've done some things that we're still just trying to figure out why we did them so badly and how to start doing them better in the future. But we've also done a lot of things really well. And I think it's a time to look at all of that and think about it and look at what our next action should be. But it's also just a time to celebrate. It's an amazing place. I know it better than most, having lived in Russia and the United States for 26 years. You really get a sense when you come back of how special it is, how rare it is, and what a wonderful construct it is. So it's all of that in 3 hours together at the Connexa Center. And I spoke in Montreal a couple nights ago, and it was just such a lovely interaction and evening with everybody there. To me, it's just a fun, personal part of Canada's 150th. Well, listening to the audience comments, and we sold out in a bunch of cities around the country. I think they find it sort of informative. Things they maybe hadn't thought of about our country, about the fact that the oldest life on Earth is here in Canada on the shore of Hudson Bay. That the oldest human remains we found in North America, from some of the earliest of the first peoples and the First Nations, are on the shores of Labrador, and right through to some of the personalities that maybe you've never heard of. The people that, to me, are so indicative of Canada, past and present. Some of those individual stories that I think help tell the history and the present of Canada well. And people, they'll hear some songs they've never heard before as well, including one I wrote about when my family first settled in Moose Jaw 110 years ago, when my great-grandfather came over just with a heart busting with hope of this new opportunity for him and his young family, and how that all panned out and turned into his great-grandson having had a chance to fly in space. That long continuum of our country, I think that's what people will come away with, and maybe a melody in their head they hadn't had there before. I've been lucky enough as a Canadian to live in several places around the country, including Moose Jaw. As a young pilot in the Air Force, of course, I trained and lived in Moose Jaw. My family moved there, my wife and our first son. So I've lived in the province for a couple of years. You get a sense of it. Moose Jaw with the mayor, I don't know if Scoop Lurie, who was the mayor at the time, the history of that town. It's got kind of a nefarious history as well as quite an old history also. But being a pilot also, to see the entire province, right, on the very northern border and left to right, to have driven across it many times, and then to have flown over it in F-18s and then in spaceships, it kind of turns all of Saskatchewan into one place in my mind, both historically as well as geographically. It's hugely varied, of course, as varied as all the individuals in it. But at the same time, it is one distinct, absolutely formative part of what Canada is and the rest of the world is. And that's kind of the perspective I want people to see. The specialness of each of the places that we're from, but how it fits in with everything else. And how really the whole world, I mean, you can go around the world in 90 minutes. You know, the time it takes to eat dinner at a restaurant, you can go around the whole country, or the whole planet, I mean. So it can't be very big. And to get that sense of the fact that we come from one joined, discrete, small place, and we're all in this together. That history of Saskatchewan, the part that my family has had there, but intertwined with kind of the nature of Canada itself and the rest of the world. To me, that perspective is important, and it's one I'll be doing my best to share with everybody. And I love during the question and answer when I get a question from a 6-year-old and then an 86-year-old, all curious about how does it look? How do we fit in? What are the next opportunities for us? Where are we going with all this? And I'm in a strange position to talk about all of those things, and it's just a lot of fun for me personally also. At one point, I was out on a spacewalk. I'm Canada's first spacewalker, and to be grabbing to the outside of a spaceship, there's these little yellow handrails. They're yellow so that we can find them in a hurry. Holding on to a yellow handrail on the outside of a spaceship and being able to look at the world going by, and to be one person surrounded by the universe, no longer confined to the Earth itself, but out into the immense 3 dimensions of the universe, looking back at our world and seeing Canada roll by in 9 minutes from Vancouver to St. John's, and trying to understand that myself, just trying to have that make sense inside my own head, and then to do my very best to tell those stories, to show the images. I mean, we went through the Northern Lights while I was outside on a spacewalk. To experience the Northern Lights not as a beautiful thing in the distance, but as a visceral 3-dimensional thing around my own body. I think, to answer your question, to try and help people see the reality of what our planet is, to tell it through personal stories and the opportunities that exist now that were just dreams when my great-grandfather rode the rail into Moose Jaw and got off the train there at the platform. You know, for him to think what happened in just a few generations, that is now part of the Canadian experience. And the brand new 2 Canadian astronauts, Jenny and Josh, both from the prairies, who just got chosen, the opportunity that we've built for them and the things they might well be the first Canadians to be living on a remote research station on the moon, like we have at the South Pole in the high Canadian Arctic. To think that that's all happening, to tell those stories, I think that's what's best for people to start to understand what's beyond the normal horizons of their day-to-day lives.